Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. For those that will be using nasal interpreters, our interpreters are Craig Ridgway and Elise Shays. We will link in the chat on how to pin their videos.
And good evening again, and welcome to the Civilian Complaint Review Board's May board meeting. My name is Fred Davey, and as many of you know, I am the chair of the Civilian Complaint Review Board. I'd like to begin by asking my colleagues to introduce themselves, and I'm going to try to do it as I see you on my screen. So if we could start with Ms. Irish.
Hi everyone, Corrine Irish. I'm a mayoral appointee. I live in Harlem.
Ms. Bond.
Good evening all, my name is Erica Bond. I'm also a mayoral appointee residing in Brooklyn.
Mr. Rivadeneira.
Good evening everyone. Michael Rivadeneira. I am a city council designee for the borough of the Bronx, and I hail from the Bronx.
Ms. Dolly Butts.
Hello, my name is Monbray Staley Butts. I use she and her pronouns, and I am a city council designee from Brooklyn.
Thank you. Mr. Puma.
Good afternoon. My name is Joseph Puma. I'm a city council representative on the board from the borough of Manhattan.
Mr. Siegel.
Good evening, John Siegel. I'm appointed to the board by Mayor de Blasio, and I'm coming to you from my home in Bronx, New York.
Mr. Dwyer. I saw Frank, and it looks like he may have disappeared. He's still there. Frank, can you hear us? Are you on mute? All right, let's go to Ms. Simmons.
Hello.
You want to introduce yourself?
Esmeralda Simmons. I'm a representative of the Public Advocate. Good evening, folks.
Great. And Mr. Carcaterra is on the phone?
I am, Fred. Hello, everyone. I'm Sal Carcaterra, and I'm a police commissioner designee to the board, and I live on Staten Island. Good evening.
Great. Thanks. And let's try again for Mr. Dwyer. All right. Well, we can get him later, perhaps.
He sent a note that his mic is not working.
Okay. Great. Thanks. So let's take care of one piece of business before I say a few things. I think we need to approve the minutes of the last meeting. Is there a motion to approve those minutes?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second.
All those in favor, are there any changes, additions, revisions? All those in favor of approving the minutes, please say aye.
Aye.
Those
Aye.
no. The minutes are approved. Thank you. So the last time we all spoke, no one knew what would happen in the trial of former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin. Since our last meeting, the world has learned he would be convicted of murdering George Floyd, convicted not just on one of the counts, but all 3 counts of criminal conduct. And this isn't the last of the criminal accountability Officer Chauvin and his partners that day could face. Just last week, a federal grand jury indicted 4 officers, including Derek Chauvin, for violating George Floyd's civil rights. This level of criminal accountability is rare for police officers, particularly those who kill or severely injure someone while on duty. That's why agencies like the CCRB are so important. In instances where someone is killed or hurt or traumatized by an interaction with an officer or police officer that does not lead to criminal accountability, there has to be an administrative backdrop. Not all misconduct is criminal, and often potentially criminal misconduct goes unpunished. This reality makes administrative accountability necessary. And the fact that an officer does not face criminal charges for killing or maiming or traumatizing a person should never, ever preclude a civilian oversight agency like the CCRB from moving forward with administrative accountability. I am eager to believe that the conviction of former Officer Chauvin and these indictments that he and his fellow former officers face signals a new day for policing and accountability, as well as ultimate justice in our country. Whether that is the reality we live in now or not remains to be seen. No matter what, though, our work at CCRB continues. We remain focused on petitioning state lawmakers for binding disciplinary authority in our cases, for greater access to evidence, and for exemptions from state sealing statutes, and to reform a system that allows the police commissioner to have full authority and discretion over the disciplinary process. It's abundantly clear to me that the police commissioner, any police commissioner, and not just this one, and I just want to say, in my dealings with the current commissioner, Dermot Shea, those encounters have proven to be productive for the things around which we engaged in. So this is not about this commissioner. It's about any commissioner should not be able to downgrade or overturn recommended discipline from the CCRB, should not be able to downgrade or overturn agreed upon guilty pleas reached between our prosecutors, officers, and the Commissioner of Trials office, and should not be able to decide whether or not a trial even occurs at all in a case. In addition to final authority, we're also asking the state legislature to exempt the CCRB from state sealing statutes. The City Council and City Hall have given the CCRB a new legal mandate to investigate racial profiling and patterns of bias-based policing by specific officers, with the passage and the signing of Council Bill 2212. For us to achieve this mandate, we absolutely must be exempted from these sealing statutes. Racial profiling investigations and inquiries into patterns of bias are extremely important and have to be taken seriously. Our lack of access to information should raise serious concerns about the CCRB's ability to investigate racial profiling to the best of our ability. In order to investigate racial profiling allegations or bias-based allegations covered under the new Charter Section 441 that would require us to review past conduct, the agency needs access to information about sealed cases, access that we are currently denied by the NYPD, which cites these state sealing statutes as the reason. Without access to sealed arrest records and other information, it will be extremely difficult for the CCRB to investigate racial profiling or to assess patterns of bias among individual members of the NYPD, such as Deputy Inspector Coble. The state legislature needs to address this sealing issue, or else the CCRB's racial profiling investigations and inquiries into patterns of bias will be set up to fail. The current legislative session ends June 10th. As of yet, no legislation has been introduced in Albany to fix the state sealing statute issue. This must change. We need this legislation in this session of the state assembly, of the state legislature. We will continue to advocate for an exemption from sealing statutes and for disciplinary authority. These changes are necessary positive steps we can take to empower independent oversight in New York City. Additionally, as New York opens back up and more people are getting vaccinated, the CCRB is redoubling its outreach and education efforts. We're working closely, very closely with Jordan Stockdale, who runs the city's Young Men's Initiative, on ways we can advertise the CCRB and what we can and advertise the CCRB and what we do, so that more New Yorkers know who we are and that we are here as a resource. Our Deputy Director for Outreach and Intergovernmental Affairs, Jahai Rose, is leading new efforts to reach more New Yorkers who live in communities that are the product, that produce rather, the most complaints of police misconduct, so that more people are aware of their rights in a police encounter and what they can do if those rights are violated. And we really appreciate Jahai and the folks who work with him working to make sure that more New Yorkers know about the CCRB, particularly in those areas where the most complaints about officer misconduct are generated. And our Youth Advisory Council is working on a project intended to reach more young people in New York and elsewhere as we work to elevate the voices of our young people who are often overlooked in conversations about how to reform our nation's policing. I expect the next year to be a challenging one for all of us. New York must make every effort possible to empower civilian oversight and rebuild trust between the community and police that is so essential to public safety. Without this trust, it will not only be more difficult for police and non-police first responders to deal with the uptick of gun violence affecting New York City, but it will also just make it impossible to engage the communities in ways we need to ensure public safety. We all have to do our part, be a part of the solution to stem this violence that we're seeing, and violence anywhere in the city. What happened this past weekend and what's been happening for months across the city is unacceptable. But without a system of accountability that guarantees New Yorkers can trust their police department, our efforts to improve public safety will falter. All of us on this board are dedicated to earning communities' trust and to doing our part to increase public safety in our city. On that note, our staff are working hard to investigate new complaints every day and to provide a complete assessment of what happened at the protest last summer. We plan to keep New Yorkers updated throughout all of it, and I am thankful for the continued advocacy of this group and all New Yorkers for empowered civilian oversight and a more accountable police force. With that, I would like to turn it over to CCRB's Executive Director, John Darsh. John.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to echo Chair Davey. There's a lot happening at the city level that will bring positive change to the way the NYPD's disciplinary system functions in New York City. The disciplinary matrix is a positive step. It is the most progress the city can make on increasing NYPD concurrence with CCRB recommendations without changing state law. More needs to happen at the state level. It is important that the agency continue to advocate for final disciplinary authority, but even more importantly, the agency needs to be exempted from ceiling statutes. As the chair said, the legislature really needs to act on this. We, the staff, will be unable to do the job the city has asked us to do, investigating bias-based policing and profiling, unless we're exempted from ceiling statutes. I think it's my honor to tell this board that starting on June 1st, the CCRB will begin investigating Phase 2 sexual misconduct. Sexual misconduct is among the most serious misconduct committed by police officers. We broke this type of misconduct into phases to make sure that staff and this agency had time to build capacity to handle the most serious cases of sexual misconduct alleged to have been committed by members of service. Now we have a group of senior investigators who have completed intensive training in trauma-informed interviewing. The Civilian Assistance Unit has hired 2 advocates who are scheduled to begin on May 24th. Now that the CAU is staffed, we will be able to adequately help victims dealing with specific traumas and connect them to city services. This includes those experiencing mental health issues or crises, which we are here to discuss tonight. CAU will be able to provide guidance on city resources and how those experiencing mental health crises can seek help and support through New York City, in addition to allowing the agency to assess issues they may have specifically with the NYPD. CCRB is now prepared to work with survivors of sexual trauma with a staffed up CAU better equipped to address the specific needs of vulnerable and struggling New Yorkers. The CCRB continues to review protest cases, and we expect to have a protest report out this year. CCRB staff are returning to the office, operating on a flexible schedule of mixed in-person and remote work. And if you need to file a complaint in person, our office is open. I want to thank the staff for continuing operations. I want to thank members of the public for participating in this meeting. And just some ground rules for this evening. Please use the raise your hand feature, which if you click on the participants tab button at the bottom right of your screen, and then there's at the top it says participants, and then in the middle it says chat. Above where it says chat and to the right, there's a little hand, and that's how you raise your hand. And if thank you, Chair. That's all I have this month.
Thank you, John. We're now going to turn to a presentation by our Senior Data and Policy Analyst, Senior Data and Policy Analyst, Sean McMahon. Sean.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, Sean.
Good. Yes. Okay, good. You worried me for just a second. Thank you for having me very much. And can you see my screen okay?
We can, yes.
Very good. Excellent. Yeah, so this month, while we are focusing on mental health in the community, Policy Unit wanted to provide some more information about a particular allegation of police misconduct that relates to mental health and individuals experiencing a mental health crisis that has increased in the last few years. That allegation is forcible removal to the hospital. I want to emphasize this is not our language, this is Patrol Guide language, but Patrol Guide Procedure 221.13 on mentally ill or emotionally disturbed persons is the primary Patrol Guide procedure that governs forcible removal to the hospital. And these are kind of the main definitions.
Sean,
can you say
just a little bit louder, please?
Yes, I can. I can also move my mic slightly closer to my mouth. The Patrol Guide Procedure 221.13 defines an emotionally disturbed person, or EDP, as, quote, a person who appears to be mentally ill or temporarily deranged and is conducting himself in a manner which a police officer reasonably believes is likely to result in serious injury to himself or others. And the primary part of the procedure that we look at here is this portion. When a uniformed member of the service reasonably believes that a person who is apparently mentally ill or emotionally disturbed and must be taken into protective custody because the person is conducting himself in a manner likely to result in a serious injury to himself or others. So serious injury is a primary part of this. And this just briefly is a breakdown of the number of allegations we've received.
Could you please slow down a moment? Thank you.
Yes, I can. This is just a breakdown of the number of allegations that we have received, closed, and substantiated by year. I'll point out here that in 2017, this is when some provisions around EDP changed, so this is where we first started to look at this form of allegation, which is why, of course, we only have 4 allegations closed that year. 2020, it may look like this is going down, but I'll remind everyone that that is during lockdown, so all kinds of allegations drop down, of course. And I'm going to talk just for a minute here now about how we investigate those cases and the types of things that we look for. Investigators look for officers to have a specific and objective reason to believe that an individual is conducting themselves in a way that is, again, likely to result in serious injury to himself or others. The primary kind of factors that we look at there are whether a CV was rationally upset as opposed to being irrationally agitated. You are allowed to be rationally upset, and we will see cases in which, for example, a CV is upset at their treatment at the hands of homeless shelter staff or a retailer or police or any other number of things they're fairly rationally upset about and should not result in you being forcibly removed to the hospital as though you were disturbed. Whether or not the CV was acting uncooperatively as opposed to acting in a manner that could lead to injury. Self-harm, again, is a very different thing than just not wanting to cooperate or having a serious disagreement with police officers. Whether information about the CV's medical background was actually derived from a medical professional. So members of service will call EMS to come and take a CV, and I'm sorry, CV here, if that needs to be defined as complainant victim. We'll decide whether or not, EMS is going to come and take someone away, but EMS will make their own determination on the scene if they're able to. Sometimes there are cases where CV simply does not want to talk to EMS, which is one of the reasons that an officer's determination may be prioritized. Sometimes there isn't time. Sometimes the situation is such that, including especially around self-harm, that officers may not need that. And whether an alternative police action such as an arrest or summons would have been more appropriate given the situation. And we've just included in our presentation some of the main resources in Queens for anybody who is experiencing serious mental health crisis.
Thank you, Sean. Are there any questions from board members from Sean on this presentation? All right. Well, thank you, Sean, and thank you for this information. I think since we did introductions, Mr. Joseph has joined us. Mr. Joseph, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Chair. Good evening. I apologize for being late. My name is Nathan Joseph. I am a City Council appointee, and I'm from Staten Island.
Great. Thank you. So now we're going to have public comment. Yahaira, you want to give us our, I think we have guest speakers. So do you want to introduce any guest speakers that we might have?
Thank you, Chair. First, we'll be hearing from Daniel Donahue. He's COO of Transitional Services for New York.
So the speaker, please go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, please proceed.
Hi, good evening. I just want to say thank you for allowing us to present. My name is Daniel Donahue. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Transitional Services for New York. We're a mental health organization that serves over 5,000 New York City residents annually who have a serious mental illness through our supportive housing, treatment, care management, social determinant programs, and our crisis diversion programs. In 2017, we began operating the first rapid response mobile crisis team in the city called the LEAD team, which is an acronym for the Local Emergency Assistance and De-Escalation Team. And we responded to calls for individuals experiencing a psychiatric crisis in a very specific geographic region in the 105th precinct that was a known hotspot for calls that were categorized as EDP calls, according to the 911 data for 2012. And we field a two-person team that consists of a licensed mental health professional and a certified peer counselor for 8 hours a day, 7 days a week. And our operating times were purposely coincided with the 105th highest response times for EDP calls throughout the day. And this two-person team that's operating 7 days a week averages about 1,800 crisis contacts per year. And those contacts, about a third would have otherwise resulted in a call to 911 and a visit to the emergency department for behavioral health. Slightly more than 60% of the calls were for serious crisis that included depression, paranoia, suicidal ideation, verbal altercations, and general agitation. And despite the severity of these calls, less than 5% of them required a further visit to the emergency department or any involvement of emergency services. The licensed mental health clinician and the certified peer are able to provide supportive counseling to de-escalate the crisis at hand and allow a person in crisis to remain in place in their home, in their apartment, and receive a referral to community-based supports for any needs that were identified during the encounter. So in our experience, I think a key strategy to improve the NYPD's response to psychiatric emergencies is to continue to invest in crisis response and further develop crisis response teams like ours that are staffed with licensed mental health professionals, but on a much larger scale. In the last couple of months, there's been some positive steps forward with the city testing out crisis response teams in select areas. And we think that this is a key strategy to improving New York City residents' experiences in crisis. And thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. Yahira, next speaker.
Thank you so much, Daniel. Next, we'll be hearing from Evelyn Graham-Nasi from Community Access.
Evelyn.
Specialist with Community Access, a nonprofit provider of supportive housing and mental health services here in New York City. I am also a peer, which means I'm not just a professional advocate for people with mental health concerns, but I also identify personally as someone who has lived with mental health concerns or who has experienced firsthand a mental health crisis response. I want to thank the CCRB for inviting me to speak today and for making time to consider police interactions with New Yorkers who are experiencing emotional or mental distress. These interactions are the very focus of the advocacy work I do with Community Access and the coalition that we help lead, which is called Correct Crisis Intervention Today, New York City, or CCIT NYC for short. We don't have much experience working with the CCRB to address police relations with people in the mental health crisis because we advocate for an alternative response entirely, one that does not send the police to address someone who is in need of mental health care. This wasn't always the case. We initially encouraged crisis intervention team training for the NYPD, believing officers could be taught humane de-escalation tactics, but CIT did not work. During the 5-year period between 2015 and 2020, when over 15,000 officers were provided CIT training, the number of New Yorkers experiencing a mental health crisis who were killed by police more than doubled. And the majority of those killed were people of color. So now we ask the city to recognize that an individual experiencing a mental or emotional crisis does not need policing. This should not be an issue for law enforcement, but instead best handled by trained peers like myself and emergency medical responders. In other words, people with the proper skill set, cultural competence, and desire to help. We are concerned not only with the excessive use of violence against people in crisis, but also with the NYPD's reliance on coerced hospitalization, which is also traumatic. Instead, Community Access is calling for a greater investment in peer-informed services, crisis respite centers, affordable and supportive housing programs, and person-centered models of care like intensive mobile treatment teams. Efforts to retrain law enforcement or expand involuntary programs like assisted outpatient treatment, also known as Kendra's Law, are flawed and harmful. I know this because I received an unwanted police response myself, and it led to a forced hospitalization. I was sitting on my sofa quietly when someone knocked on my door, and it was the police. A family member had called 911 and told the operator that I had a knife. 8 to 9 police officers showed up, and an officer told me that I had to go with him. No one asked me any questions or found the knife near me, but I had to go with him. I was afraid, so I put on my coat and shoes and grabbed my medication because they told me to bring it with me. I was escorted downstairs, and when I got outside, an officer asked me if I wanted to go to the police car or ambulance. I chose the ambulance. Another police officer said he would ride with me. They dropped me off at Bellevue Hospital, which was a continuation of my nightmare. I waited 3 hours before a doctor saw me, and when I told him that I needed my high blood pressure medication, he ignored me and told me to go back to the waiting area. I didn't get my high blood pressure medication until 2 days later. Unfortunately for me, it was a 3-day weekend and I was stuck in a place where I did not belong. We were locked up like animals. People were screaming, yelling, and banging on windows. I was scared to death. I was also angry that a family member lied on me, angry that I was forced to go to the hospital, and angry when I learned that I was stuck until Tuesday. When Tuesday finally came around, I was taken upstairs to the ward and wasn't released until 2 weeks later. I wish that the police officer had asked me questions and listened to my responses before telling me that I had to go with him because I wasn't acting violently. I also wish that there was some kind of support system available to prevent me from being hospitalized in the first place. As a result of my forced hospitalization, it is a trigger now whenever I see a group of police officers because it reminds me of my bad experience, and I no longer trust psychiatrists or that family member. I fear if we do not focus on developing the alternative response systems and services that those of us with professional and lived expertise know to be more effective and humane, that the CCRB will continue to field complaints and struggle to repair police-community relations. Coercive tactics breed fear and mistrust, especially when applied to people in need of services and compassion, not policing. So as long as police continue to use excessive force and coercion against members of our community, we ask the CCRB to ensure that offending officers are held accountable to disciplinary actions and to support the swift release of body camera footage. When body camera footage is delayed or withheld, it breeds further mistrust, resentment, and fear. Thank you again for inviting me to speak and for being willing to consider our perspective. Community access in the CCIT NYC coalition that I represent welcome further conversations on this topic and to be a resource to you all moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Evelyn. We really appreciate your comments. Yeah, Hiram?
Thank you so much, Evelyn, and thank you, Community Access, for all the work that you're doing in that community. Next, we'll be hearing from Nicholas Tambora, a therapist from the Jewish Board of Family and Children's Services.
Hi, good afternoon. Good evening, rather. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
All right, thank you so much. Yes, my name is Nick Tambora. I am a licensed mental health counselor. I often have to work with law enforcement in some situations involving a mental health crisis. And, you know, in my own experiences, I've had some concerns about how they have presented in handling some of these situations. And often I've had to worry more about a police officer's behavior than one of my clients in these types of situations. The Office of Research and Public Affairs had published a study in 2015 that elaborated that the risk of being killed while being approached or stopped by law enforcement in the community is 16 times higher for individuals with untreated serious mental illness than for other civilians. And I think as part of the shift to these alternative methods of crisis response, there's been this bit of a backlash from a lot of supporters of the NYPD about this type of remark of like, you know, let's see a social worker kind of handle these things that they're usually used to handling. And the thing is, social workers already do that. In residential homes and care coordination services, we already do respond to mental health crises. In the event of a mental health crisis, if you had to choose between a police officer and all of his equipment and some, you know, middle-aged social worker with nothing but a notepad and a pen, money is going to be on the social worker every time in resolving these crises effectively. And the thing is, though, with social services, and part of the reason why I wanted to speak today is that my own field has the same foundations built on racism and systemic oppression that law enforcement is founded on. And in many ways, social services has been and still is an accessory to law enforcement. So there are many things that I think the last 30 years, a lot of social workers have responded to try and rectify the past and try to create some meaningful efforts to engage and respond to mental health crises and work more effectively in partnering with people experiencing crises. And some things that I can kind of share with you, and I think some things that the NYPD needs to learn from, is that mental health professionals prioritize this type of person-centered work to build a rapport as quickly as possible, and usually taking an active interest to understand as accurately as possible the person's internal perspective. by recognizing also that and this type of systemic approach of understanding what are the conditions that have led to this person experiencing the crisis, there's this type of more reflective effort to try and have the person engage with you in a way that's much more meaningful and solution-oriented. Police, if you've seen some of the history of like documents, like recorded ways that police have been trained, either through the Atlantic, the Times, the Post, they have these types of trainings like the bulletproof warrior, killology. These emphasize these types of low trust and high threat engagements that have led to conditions where police officers are being trained more like soldiers than community agents. And what's happening is that because that's part of this type of training, and by prioritizing their personal safety, their responses to mental health crises are much more reactive. And that's not enough, because what's becoming more of a problem, and part of my concern around one of the questions in the email about what can the NYPD do to improve its response to experiencing mental health crises, is that it's creating conditions that are not sustainable within the NYPD. There's this topic that comes up a lot for social workers, because we do work with the same populations that the NYPD do. And we also experience this type of absorption of stress, of particularly traumatic stress, and it can lead to sometimes ways that it affects like our mental health, including like risk of burnout. And there's a subject called vicarious trauma, which is a state of tension and preoccupation of traumatic experiences described by others. And it could lead to symptoms such as a persistent arousal state, feelings of inadequacy, helplessness, dissatisfaction, intrusive thoughts, difficulty talking about your own thoughts and feelings. And in many conversations I've had with police officers, there has been this undercurrent of a mental health crisis formulating because police officers, I don't think, are able to adequately process some of their experiences effectively. And because there's not these conditions, adequate conditions in place in the NYPD, they're responding to mental health crises or other situations involving high stress, situations involving people, and they're not able to adequately process in a healthy way how to engage effectively and create a solution. And it's creating in turn effects on them, because as Blue Help, which is this website compiling a list of law enforcement officers who've been dying by suicide, it seems like there's a mental health crisis that's been brewing. Blue Help documented 172 suicides in 2020 and 238 suicides in 2019. Officers struggle with depression, anxiety, anger, substance dependence, and a work culture that discourages police officers, particularly male officers, from discussing their mental health struggles in an affirmative way. And when you combine that with the emphasis on militarization and a threat response, it's contributing to a ticking time bomb, where police officers are not becoming a hazard to the community, but they're becoming hazards to themselves. And I think there is this question that has to be presented to the NYPD that has to go beyond this idea of crisis intervention training. Is that when there's no work environment that encourages accessible mental health treatment for their officers or requires supervision to process possible traumatic stress responses, there's not going to be an effective crisis intervention training, regardless of how many hours you have, regardless of how well you practice in these trainings. It's just not sustainable. The NYPD needs to actually do a lot of reflection in the way that it operates internally in this culture that's creating these type of conditions that are not sustainable, that are creating the problems that many officers are facing in silence, and creating some of the conditions that lead officers to take their own lives. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicholas. Any questions, comments on any of the people we've heard so far? Are there more speakers, Yohaira?
We'll be hearing from two more community groups before we go to public comment. Next, we'll be hearing from Kimberly Blair, Manager of Public Policy and Advocacy at the National Alliance on Mental Health of New York City.
Great. Kimberly. Kimberly, you might be on mute. So should we go to the next speaker? Oh, there you are. Kimberly? We'll off mute for a second. Try it one more time. So Yahira, let's try the next speaker and we can come back to Kimberly.
No problem. Next, we'll be hearing from Rebecca Anuru, program manager at the Coordinated Children's Initiative of New York City.
Great. Is Rebecca there?
Yes, I'm here. Can y'all hear me?
Yes, please go ahead.
All right. Hey, y'all. So I want to just clarify first off that I'm definitely representing myself today. And I want to start my statement just with a little bit about me. I'm from the Bronx, 175th and the Grand Concourse. And I come from a life where in the 90s, I watched Black men try to have videotaped public encounters with the police so that some evidence of what happened to them could be captured. And then I grew up to a teenagerhood where every summer is lynching season, where police officers and vigilantes kill Black women, children, and men on camera, on the news, harass us, tell us to grow up even though we are children, all types of things. I have inhabited an unambiguously Black body for 29 years now, and where's the safety for me? I grew up into my young adulthood to enter Black Lives Matter activism the fall of 2014 after the very public murders of Mike Brown and Eric Garner. I went to school in Michigan and began advocating on behalf of the life of Aura Rosser, a 40-year-old Black woman with mental health challenges that was murdered by Ann Arbor police in response to a domestic violence call. One officer tased her as she had a knife in her hand while in her kitchen, and the other officer shot her fatally. According to an eyewitness, the other officer, Officer Rob, the shooting happened so fast that Aura had not even had a chance to be attacking. She was shot in the heart within seconds of the officers entering her home. I said her name and people erased her. How do you repair the trauma that the police have done to Black bodies? I will not beg for the lives of my children. We matter because we're here. I live with PTSD and depression myself, and I represent the hood through and through. And so when I'm thinking about how the NYPD functions in the Bronx specifically, the NYPD is a gang in the Bronx. The NYPD harasses folks in the Bronx. Like, there is no other way to put it. And so I can't say with much confidence that I believe in police reform simply because of the origins of policing in America, simply because of what I have witnessed. We do not need police in their current form to show up as responders to mental health crises and emergencies because they're ill prepared. Crisis de-escalation is a skill that can be physical without weapons and most definitely done without harm. And honestly, we know that police officers can show the skill set for white bodies, even the most dangerous and literally murderous of them. Systems change as people change, and in order to change how police officers respond to mental health crises, they must choose to move better. That we have done all the trainings under the sun. I'm not really sure what else we need to be doing besides holding people accountable as best as possible, because families and lives are being altered forever because of the highly weaponized nature of the police, especially the NYPD. I see the uniform, the badge and gun, and I see the need to get away, to go somewhere safe immediately, because the power we give police officers is ingrained. Reform isn't enough. We need transformation, new structures, new ways of being and showing up. Other fields have the tried and true methods. We're hearing from social workers, we're hearing from folks in the field on the ground that have de-escalated things without murdering people, without harming them greatly. Like, even the fact that people want to run to their tasers immediately, like police officers run to their tasers faster than, hey, let me have a deep conversation with you. Like, just even in a few seconds, if you just act like you want to hear this person out and actually hear why they're upset, why what's going on is going on, instead of assuming, even in that patrol guide, to see the word deranged. Like what does that even mean? You know, so I feel like I'm in a space of just realizing that we need to move different. Like there is no other option. We can sit here and say, oh, well, like individual police officers, we're not saying you're racist. Well, I'm saying you're racist. I'm saying that how you're moving is racist. I'm saying that we need to be choosing to move differently if we're going to, and that's within systems, from providers, all types of folks, not just police officers. Let me be very clear, but that's who I'm talking about right now. So I just want to say with the utmost respect that it is time for folks to be held accountable and actually choose to move different and show up and body different, and especially how they respond to unambiguously Black bodies, because I'm not changing. I'm still here and I'm still going to be as Black as I am. And I deserve my life because I fought for it, and I have been here fighting for it the entire time I have been on this earth because of the structural circumstances that I have had to navigate. And that's my piece. Thank you, y'all, for listening.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments related to this speaker? All right. For our next speaker, I'm sorry?
My name is Kimberly Blair from NAMI. I had a connection issue earlier. Is it okay if I testify now?
Please proceed, Kimberly.
Thank you. My name is Kimberly Blair, and I'm here testifying as the Manager of Public Policy and Advocacy for NAMI NYC, as well as a peer and a family member. For 40 years, NAMI NYC has served as a leading service organization for the mental health community throughout the city, providing groundbreaking advocacy, education, and support services for individuals affected by mental illness, their families, and the greater public, all completely free of charge. Our renowned peer and evidence-based services are unique in that they are led for and by members of the mental health community and are reflective of the diversity of New York City. Specifically, one of the services that we run is a peer-led, peer-run helpline, which acts as a support service to provide emotional support, psychoeducation, and community-based referrals to people living with mental health conditions, family members, caregivers, mental health professionals, and the public. The majority of those calls come from individuals with mental health diagnosis or family members, and nearly half of those come from BIPOC communities across the city. Since the pandemic began, we have seen a twofold increase in the number of helpline calls, including a dramatic increase from parents concerned about police response to mental health crisis situations with their children. One of the most heartbreaking calls during the pandemic came from a concerned mother calling on how best to support her son, a 23-year-old young Black man, after she called 911 for mental health support while her son was in crisis, and instead was met by a police officer who arrived to the scene with guns drawn. As a result, her son fled the scene for fear of his life, and he was later detained and transported to a facility to obtain mental health care. Although this occurred towards the beginning of the pandemic, the mother still frequently calls our helpline to this day for different resources and community-based referrals to help her son, who has since experienced homelessness, for fears of returning home to the police to where the police once responded. We know too well from recent history in our own city the trauma associated with the police response to mental health crises that is not unique to this story and often has resulted in more catastrophic consequences, such as the murder of 18 Black and brown individuals with mental illness during police encounters since 2015. NAMI NYC would ultimately like to see these casualties avoided and prevented by instituting a citywide mental health crisis response that is appropriate and addresses people's needs and does not further criminalize individuals in crisis, as often happens when the police respond. The best way to do this is for independent organizations such as the CCRB to come out in support of a peer-led model to crisis response, such as that proposed by Correct Crisis Intervention Today in NYC, or CCIT NYC. As part of the steering committee, we believe that the CCIT proposal for a mental health crisis response is the best model because the proposal was community informed after the coalition hosted a series of focus groups on the topic. The proposal promotes a mental health crisis response consisting of one peer who has received substantial training as a crisis worker in de-escalation practices, and one independent medic or EMT who is not directly tied to the city's current EMS to avoid response teams defaulting to calling the police when there's absolute no present danger or public safety emergency. The proposal, which I can send after this, also narrowly defines the exception to when to call the police as when a crisis team member has the authority if a person is taking action which is causing seriously bodily harm to self or another person, or the person wields a weapon to credibly threaten imminent and serious bodily harm to self or another specific person, and no other non-police de-escalation measures can safely be taken. That part is emboldened. We want to make sure that it's literally last resort to involve the police. Items as a pocket knife or scissors do not constitute as a weapon. So in the story I told earlier, the son was not harming anyone. He was simply in crisis. And as such, the first response should have been de-escalation and working with the individual and his family to see what options were available to them as preferable next steps to his care. However, only an equipped mental health response team consisting of peers and representatives from the community being served would have been able to determine that, not the police. As the city contemplates how best to implement a mental health crisis response system using the $112 million recently proposed by the mayor in his mental health recovery budget, we ask that they turn to the CCIT NYC proposal and support adopting the model in order to prevent future casualties and ensure more access to appropriate care for BIPAC community members across NYC. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions or comments for this speaker? Yahara, I believe this is our last guest speaker.
Correct. We can move on to public comment session.
We'll remind the public that you have 2 minutes to speak. If you're interested in speaking, use the raise your hand feature that is under the participants tab on your screen. And again, with the condition that comments should be kept to 2 minutes. Yahira, would you bring us our first public speaker?
Thank you, Chair. Before we're going to first hear from Richard Navis, and while we're bringing him up, I want to acknowledge thank you for Queens Community Board 3 for being in attendance, as well as Brooklyn Community Board 8, as well as representatives from the offices of Assemblymember Catherine Nolan, Councilwoman and Chair Adrian Adams, Councilwoman Alika Ambrose-Samuel, Assemblymember Francis, and the Queens County District Attorney's Office. Richard?
Thank you very much. I appreciate you getting to me. I'm from Bubble Park, and I remember 2 years back I attended one of your meetings along Mermaid Avenue, and I voiced 2 concerns. One is the fact that our 311 system needs upgrade. Many people in my community will submit a 311 complaint, and the police officers that respond will respond back on the 311 complaint with false finding. Now, to bring that up to date, several weeks back, we had our school buses that were blocking fire hydrants 12 hours at night. And the officers that responded back on the 311 complaint saying the bus is gone upon arrival, or they did not observe any violation. Meanwhile, we were present and waiting for the police to come. With that said, we called into the station house to find out who were those officers that responded and submitted false finding. Till this day, we have not received any information from the precinct or any calls from anyone giving us that information. So I think we need to look at that and say, well, 311 is an official document, and the officers should be signing off with the name and serial numbers So if we have concerns with this, we should be able to go after and take it up with the Civilian Complaint Review Board or with the precinct itself. I thank you very much for your time, and I hope you will take that into consideration, and maybe someone could get back to me.
Thank you. Thank you. I think that's also an issue for your local city council person as well in terms of 311 reform. But we will pass this information on to our colleagues at City Hall as well, and other places within the government, public advocate's office, as well as the City Council. So thank you. Our next speaker, please, you're hired.
Thank you. Next, we'll be hearing from Jordan Woke.
Hello, Jordan.
Hi. I understand that board members vote on cases, either as a panel or en banc. At one point, the panels were composed of 3 board members, 1 each from mayoral, police commissioner, and city council appointees. I asked at the agency report on how the votes go, clearly not at the level of individual cases. Maybe by month or quarter, how often were the votes unanimous? And how often did the different classes of appointees take a minority position, and in which disposition? How often did mayoral, police commissioner, and city council appointees disagree with the group's decision, and on which side? Thank you.
Thank you. And we will take that under advisement. I suspect there'll be some more public information soon about how board members vote, but we'll take your comments under advisement. Next speaker, please.
Thank you, Jordan. Next, we'll be hearing from John Sonda.
Yes. On page 44 of the 2020 semi-annual report, which was issued last month, it states, where CCRB investigation reveals evidence of possible misconduct that falls outside of the CCRB's jurisdiction, the board files this possible misconduct as other misconduct noted, OMN, and reports it to the NYPD for further investigation and possible disciplinary action. According to the CCRB, the most frequent OMN referred to IAB was for improper use of a body-worn camera, which increased from 93 instances occurring in the last 6 months of 2019 compared to 170 instances occurring in the first 6 months of 2020. The only example provided in regards to improper use of body-worn camera was when officers had turned the cameras off in the middle of an incident. What other examples of improper use of a body-worn camera has the CCRB referred? For instance, is an officer not turning on their body-worn camera to begin with an example of improper use? Do officers claim the body-worn camera was unintentionally turned off or malfunctioned? Or officers admitting to purposely turning off body-worn cameras in the middle of an incident?
Thank you. John Darsh, do you want to speak to that?
So if an officer fails to turn on their body-worn camera footage, turn on their body-worn camera at the start of an encounter, and the encounter was required to be recorded, the board would find that to be other misconduct and refer that to the department for investigation. Similarly, if an officer turns off their camera in the middle of an encounter inappropriately, the board would find that as other misconduct and refer that to the department for further investigation.
Thank you. Any other comments from board members? All right. Next speaker, please.
Thank you, Chair. That concludes our public comment portion.
Excellent. Thank you. So is there any old business to come before the board? And I can't see all of you, so if there's anything, please. No. All right. Is there any new business to come before the board? All right. Seeing none and hearing none, let me thank the staff of CCRB for their continued hard work and dedication, particularly during this extraordinary time that we're in. Your good work manifests itself in so many ways, and we're very appreciative. Let me thank my fellow board members for their commitment and dedication as well, their hard work as well, and thank the public always for keeping us all accountable to what it is that we've been charged to do. So with that, no other comments. We will ask for a motion to adjourn to executive session. Is there such a motion? You guys want to stay?
Motion.
So moved.
It sounds like Mr. Joseph seconded.
Yes.
All right. All those, thank you. All those in favor of adjourning to executive session, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? And just a reminder, we have a new way of re-entering executive session to the board members and want you to take note of that. All right, with that, we will sign off. We'll thank the public again, and we're adjourned to executive session. Thank you.